The first thing Kale noticed was the smell. Not poison, not exactly, but something wrong underneath the sweetness of the ceremonial broth, the way a wrong note hides inside a chord and only catches you after the music has already moved on. He had smelled it before. Not here. Not in this world. Somewhere else, in a kitchen that no longer existed, in a life that had been taken from him one reality jump at a time. He set the tasting spoon down on the edge of the carved obsidian bowl, with the care of a man diffusing something. Around him, the preparation chamber hummed with the organized anxiety of a dozen Vethkai attendants moving in their precise, unreadable way, four-limbed, but carrying their upper arms folded against their chests in the posture that meant formal service. Their skin was the blue-gray of deep ocean water, and their eyes, wide and horizontally pupilled, did not blink at the same rate as human eyes. They blinked in sequence, one at a time, cycling through a room in a wave, which Kale had found deeply unsettling for the first 3 weeks and now barely noticed. He was the Queen's human food reader. The title had been given to him without ceremony, without paperwork, without anything resembling an official process, because the Vethkai did not do things the way humans did. They had found him. They had observed him for 6 days without his knowledge. Then the first attendant had simply appeared at the door of the provisional habitat and said, in the flat translated tones of the interpreter node clipped to her throat, "You have been selected." The Queen's chambers, now. That had been 4 months ago. He lifted the spoon again and brought it to his lips, barely touching the liquid to the very tip of his tongue. The sweetness came first, fermented bloomroot, ceremonially correct. Then the warmth of compressed void spice, authentic. Then, underneath, between those two flavors, in the place where there should have been nothing but the faint mineral taste of the spring water they used in all royal preparations, something else. Bitter, cold, specific. Kale had grown up in a house with a mother who believed in old knowledge, not superstition. She had been precise about the distinction. Old knowledge was what humans had accumulated over 10,000 years of trying not to die. She had kept a garden. She had taught him the names of things. She had taught him the difference between what looked harmless and what was. He placed the spoon back down. He did not move quickly. He had learned in the months of service that the Vethkai read human movement the way humans read faces. Every acceleration was a word, every stillness a sentence. Moving quickly now would say the wrong thing. He looked slowly across the chamber to where attendant first in sequence, the one he'd privately named Celia, because her sequential blink always started with the left eye, stood overseeing the final arrangement of the serving vessels. "This preparation needs to be remade," Kale said. The chamber did not go quiet. There was no sharp intake of breath, no cinematic pause. The Vethkai did not do any of those things, but something changed in the quality of the movement, a fractional slowing in the attendants nearest to him, like a school of fish that has registered a vibration in the water. Celia moved toward him, her upper arms unfolded slightly, which he had learned was either interrogation posture or threat posture depending on whether the thumbs were extended. Her thumbs were tucked. Interrogation. "The preparation has been confirmed by 3 readers," she said through the interpreter node. "Confirmed" came out with an overtone that the node translated parenthetically as, "confirmed beyond the need for confirmation." "I know," Kale said. "And I'm telling you it needs to be remade." The word he was looking for in Vethkai didn't exist in his translation vocabulary, so he fell back on the only thing he had, the authority that came from being the human they'd selected. He didn't fully understand why they'd wanted a human for this role. He'd asked once, and the first attendant had said something the interpreter node had rendered as, "You taste differently than we do. You notice what we have learned not to notice." He had thought about that answer for 3 months without fully understanding it. He understood it now. "The base liquid has been adulterated," he said. "Something has been added. I believe it is something called greyroot compound. I have seen it used in another context." It is not immediately fatal, but it disrupts a specific metabolic pathway in warm-blooded physiology. For a Vethkai of the Queen's age and constitutional profile. He paused, searching for the word. It would not be fast. It would look like illness. It would look like the kind of illness that comes from inside. Celia's thumbs came out. Threat posture, no, not threat. The second variant, alarm. The chamber stopped. Not the people in it, they kept moving, kept carrying out their tasks. But something had stopped. Something in the air, in the quality of attention in the room. Every eye in the place, blinking in their sequential waves, had reoriented toward him and toward Celia, and the space between them had become the most important space in the room. "You are certain," Celia said. Not a question. The Vethkai used falling intonation for questions and rising intonation for statements that demanded confirmation. This was the latter. "I'm certain something is wrong," Kale said carefully. "I'm certain it doesn't belong there. I'm not certain of everything. I'm never certain of everything. That's the part I keep explaining and nobody seems to want to hear." He was aware of how this looked. He was the human, the outsider, the creature they had imported for reasons he still didn't entirely understand, and he was standing in the preparation chamber of the Vethkai Queen's first moon meal, telling them that 3 of their own certified readers had missed something. He was aware that this could go very badly. He had been in situations that went very badly before. He had developed a specific relationship with that awareness, not numbness exactly. More like the way a person learns to drive in rain. You don't stop feeling the danger. You get better at moving through it. "Show me," Celia said. He walked her to the bowl. He explained what he'd tasted, where in the flavor sequence, what the sensation was. He described the compound as best he could, the cold bitter note, the way it sat below the dominant flavors without integrating with them, the way it left a specific dryness at the back of the throat. He watched her face while he talked and learned nothing from it, because the Vethkai didn't do the things with their faces that humans did. But her upper arm stayed partially unfolded, and her thumbs stayed extended the whole time. When he finished, she said nothing for 22 seconds. He counted. Then she said, "The preparation will be remade." The chamber moved again. Not the same movement as before, something more urgent in it now, more directed, like water finding a drain. 2 attendants took the contaminated bowls away. Others began resetting the preparation surfaces. Someone sent a signal Kale didn't see or hear, because that was how the AI communicated things they didn't want to say in front of him. A frequency his ears couldn't register, a gesture below his threshold of attention. He stood in the middle of it, and felt the particular loneliness of being right. He had felt it before. In the nuked flat waste of another Earth where a man named Tinkler had shown him footage on a corroded screen, and he'd said the words that had gotten him here, not this world, but the chain of worlds that had eventually led to this one. He'd said, "That's not a natural collapse. Something made that happen, and no one had wanted to hear it, and he'd been right, and being right hadn't made anything better, just survivable. Survivability was what he had in the place of certainty." He didn't know how he had arrived on the Vethkai homeworld. He knew the broad shape of it, the building, the jumps, the 36-hour windows, the graffiti-covered walls that accumulated the warnings of everyone who had passed through before. He knew he had been traveling for a long time before he'd landed here. He knew he'd been separated from his sister on the third-to-last jump, and that he thought about her every day with a specific ache he had no Vethkai word for. He knew that whatever the building was, whatever it was doing, it had deposited him here with nothing but what he carried, which turned out to be more than he'd thought. That was the thing about being human, he decided. Humans didn't always know what they were carrying until they needed it. His mother's garden, 20 years of touching leaves and learning their names, the old knowledge. He had not expected that to be the thing that mattered. The investigation took 3 days. He was not part of it. The Vethkai didn't include him in their internal processes, which he had learned to accept the way he'd accepted many things about them. Not with happiness, but with the steady pragmatism of someone who knows that fighting every battle costs you the important ones. He went back to his quarters in the provisional habitat, ate from his own food supplies, read from the translated archive of Vethkai natural philosophy that the first attendant had given him when he'd first arrived. He slept poorly. He always slept poorly. On the second day, 3 attendants came to his habitat and asked him questions for 4 hours. The questions were precise and technical. What did he know about Greyroot compound specifically? Where had he encountered it? Could he describe the exact metabolic mechanism he had referenced? He answered everything he could and said clearly when he couldn't, and they recorded it all without visible reaction and left without telling him anything about what they'd found. On the morning of the 3rd day, Celia came to the habitat alone. The compound was confirmed, she said. The source was identified. The individual responsible has been removed from the preparation staff. A pause. The compound was new. It was designed for Vethkai physiology specifically. Our readers were not calibrated to detect it. Kale sat with that for a moment, but I was. You were. Another pause longer. You were correct about the mechanism. A reader from the secondary cabinet tested the compound against a biological model. The projected outcome, had the preparation been served, would have appeared as illness within 12 days, organ failure within 40. She tilted her head. The Vethkai gesture he'd learned meant not agreement but acknowledgement. The Queen would not have known the cause. Kale said nothing. He was thinking about his mother's garden, about the way she'd walked him through it on weekend mornings and named everything, the gray-stemmed plants she'd pointed at specifically, the ones she'd said have no business being beautiful. About the way knowledge accumulated in a person without their permission, without their knowing it would ever matter, and then waited there until it was needed. You have served well, Celia said. This was the closest thing the Vethkai had to effusive praise. Kale had learned that. He nodded, because a nod was one of the few human gestures that translated without distortion. He did not see the Queen until 4 days later. He had expected, in the way humans expect things without intending to, that there would be some kind of ceremony, a formal acknowledgement, a public moment. That was how it would have happened in any human court he'd read about, the hero summoned before the throne, the public declaration, the reward bestowed with appropriate gravity. The Vethkai did not do it that way. A summons came at the 6th hour, not the ceremonial hour, not the public hour. Just the 6th hour, when the preparation chamber was between shifts and the long corridors of the palace compound were lit in the low blue-gray of ordinary day. Celia met him at the habitat door and walked him through 6 corridors and 2 security thresholds without explanation. He had stopped asking for explanations weeks ago. He walked where he was walked and arrived where he was brought. The Queen's private room was not what he'd imagined. He had imagined something enormous, something that would hit him with its scale, the way the building had hit him the first time, that sick vertigo of space deployed as power. What he walked into was a medium-sized room with walls that were the matte dark of polished stone and a single large window that looked out over the compound gardens. The window was open. The smell of the garden came through it, alien flora, bloomroot and the sharp mineral smell of the water channels, and underneath it something he couldn't name that smelled, faintly and entirely incorrectly, like the garden of his mother's house. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He could not help it. The Queen was at the window. That was the first thing he understood. Not seated on anything throne-like, standing at the window with her upper arms folded in the neutral resting posture, and her head turned at the specific angle that meant, in Vethkai body language, attention directed outward. She was smaller than he'd expected. Older, maybe. Her coloring had more gray in it than the attendants he'd seen. The blue of her skin faded toward something like pewter. She stood very still. He crossed the room and stopped at the distance. Celia had coached him on 3 arm lengths, the formal acknowledgement radius, and waited. The Queen turned from the window. Her eyes were not horizontal pupilled like the attendant's. They were vertical, wide, the iris a deep amber that was almost orange in the blue light of the room. She looked at him for a long moment with the specific quality of Vethkai attention that he had never been able to get used to, the fullness of it, the way they didn't subdivide their attention the way humans did, but gave it all or not at all. She said something in Vethkai that his interpreter node rendered as, "You are smaller than I expected." He said, "I get that a lot." A pause. Then something happened that he had never seen in 4 months of living among the Vethkai. The queen's face changed. Not dramatically, not with the broad legibility of a human expression, but something shifted around her eyes, a softening of the muscles there, and the corners of her mouth moved in a way he had no Vethkai category for. She was amused. He filed that away. A sense of humor. The queen of the Vethkai had a sense of humor. He stored it in the same place he stored everything important, quietly, carefully, with the knowledge that he would need it later. She said something longer. The interpreter node took a moment with it, longer than usual, and then rendered it. "You tasted what our most trained readers did not taste. I am told this is because humans accumulate knowledge differently than Vethkai. Is this true?" "I don't know enough about how AI accumulate knowledge to compare," he said. "But for humans, yeah, we pick things up. We don't always know we've picked them up. We don't always know what they're for." He paused. "My mother had a garden. She taught me the names of things. I never thought I'd need to know the names of poisonous plants on an alien world, but here we are." The interpreter node had to work on that too. When it finished, the queen said, "Here we are." She stepped toward him, closer than the formal radius, inside it, which Celia had told him was a significant gesture in Vethkai proximity protocol, but had not prepared him for the reality of it. The queen was at close range now, a meter away, and he could see the fine detail of her, the secondary texture of her skin, the way her upper arms shifted in their fold, the amber of her eyes at close distance. She reached out her left hand, the ceremonial left, which he knew mattered, and touched the side of his face. Not a grip, not a gesture of restraint or examination. The fingertips laid lightly against his cheek, in the way that the interpreter node was silent, because this was not a verbal communication, in the way that he slowly understood meant something specific, something he did not have a word for in Vethkai because it wasn't a word. It was a posture, a gesture, an entire grammar of regard compacted into the lightest possible contact. And then she leaned forward, and she pressed her forehead against the side of his face, the Vethkai contact of formal and personal acknowledgement at once, and held it there for 3 seconds that felt much longer. He stood very still. He thought about the building, about the graffiti on the walls, warning after warning, world after world, humans passing through and leaving their marks for whoever came next. He thought about his sister. He thought about his mother's garden in the early morning, the smell of damp soil, the old knowledge being handed from one pair of hands to another. He thought, "I am a long way from home, and I have no idea how to get back. And right now, in this room, with this woman who rules a civilization I barely understand, I have just been told that I mattered." The queen stepped back. Her face was composed again. Whatever had moved in it was stored away now, behind the Vethkai stillness. She said, "You will continue your role." Not a question. "Yes," Kale said. He meant it completely. That night in the habitat, he took out the ball-shaped device he'd been carrying since he'd found it in what he still thought of as his father's house. In that first world, the first jump, the beginning of all of this. He held it in his palm and turned it in the light. He still didn't fully understand what it did. He knew it was old. He knew it came from somewhere called the core world. He knew that somewhere, across some number of parallel realities he couldn't count, his sister was still looking for the same answer he was. He set the device on the table and looked at it for a while. Then he opened his translated archive and kept reading. He had a queen to protect. He had a garden's worth of knowledge in his hands, and a world full of things whose names he didn't know yet. There was work to do. That was what humans did in the end in all the worlds, no matter what was stacked against them. They kept learning. They kept tasting. They kept noticing the note that didn't belong. They kept showing up. Outside the window of the habitat, the Vethkai homeworld did what it always did in the deep hours. The twin moons moved in their low arc, and the bloomroot in the compound gardens opened the way it only opened in darkness, filling the air with something sweet, something old, something that smelled, if you wanted it to, like home. Kale sat at his table with his alien archive and his strange device, and his mother's garden still growing quietly in his memory, and he read until the moon set, and he was not afraid.